Alright, so if you've clicked on this video, I'm just gonna play it safe and assume that something about the title has already rubbed you the wrong way, regardless of what demographic you're part of. If all goes well, I'll have two different demographics of people entering this video already pissed off because I guess that's the way the algorithm works these days. But hopefully, if you stick through it, you'll both learn something. This video is mostly about Revy from Black Lagoon, who's literally me, for real, the decay of internet discourse and how it's affected the way people view themselves in an increasingly hostile political landscape, and most importantly, solutions. If you're somebody, and I mean literally anybody, white, black, brown, trans, gay, straight, furry, weeaboo, mentally ill, mentally well in a sick society, as long as you aren't a tin-skin clanker, I promise something worthwhile for you is in this video. Maybe not all of it, but I'm sure there's something in here for you. Now let's start light and easy. Neon Genesis Evangelion. Evangelion, at its core, is about a boy with depression trying to find a sense of self-worth. It can dissect it a million different ways, but at its core, that's what the story is about. Now let's be real, most of us on the internet are probably somewhere on the Shinji spectrum. If you're older and you're a bad bitch, maybe you're on the Misato end of it. Now, needless to say, spoilers for Evangelion. It's an amazing show, and if you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you do. Some people will tell you that it's gonna make you worse, but that's only true if you genuinely just misinterpret the text. And hopefully I can set that straight for some of you who may be prone to that. And if you're really sensitive, you don't have to watch the end of Eva. In fact, I'd argue the rebuild offers a much better ending than end of Eva anyway. Don't at me. I'm gonna go through some broad strokes of Evangelion, because I could write a dissertation on it if I didn't stop myself. At the beginning of the story, Shinji is used as a tool by his father. His support system is an alcoholic older version of himself who barely has it figured out more than he does, a clone of his mother who gets a lot more attention from his father, and a redhead who does have a sense of self-worth, but it's entirely tied to her being better than her peers. He's also responsible for saving the world from aliens trying to nuke the planet or whatever. I don't know, to be honest. I don't really care about the lore. I just like watching traumatized characters figure out how to not hate themselves. Anyway, with all this taken into account, I think it's fair to say Shinji has it kinda rough. Now, for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip the entire plot and character development and go straight to the final scene of the final episode. Shinji, sitting in what looks like a very uncomfortable chair, ruminates over his inner woes, but his friends are there, trying to guide him to enlightenment. Eventually, with the help of his buddies, he figures out whether or not to hate yourself or love yourself is just a decision. And if you can choose to love yourself, you can hate yourself too.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations!
Anyway, this is a really amazing ending because it's probably one of the best Rorschach tests in all of media. It's actually incredible. You can't engage with it without revealing something about yourself. Anyway, I'm afraid of what strangers on the internet will think about me, so I'm not gonna engage with it. Moving on, I'm gonna reveal things about myself to strangers on the internet. After my Evangelion phase, I was tipped off to Black Lagoon. I identified pretty heavily with Misato. She was literally me, for real. But one day, my friend pointed out, you know, since you identify with purple-haired bad bitches, you might like Revy from Black Lagoon.
Don't cry, dipshit. Don't you know you gotta enjoy life, or it'll slip away?
And dear God, did I. Misato, for all her nuance and depth, is pretty insecure. She's not a pushover, but you put her in a room with a good male manipulator, and she's not gonna hold up too well. Revy has some similar core traumas to Misato that make her what she is, but she has a very different way of dealing with it. She grew up learning how power works, and she accepted it for what it was. People in positions of power are going to use it against you, and the only solution to that is taking power back for yourself.
Is money your god?
It's power. Something a lot more useful than God.
In episode 5, she's on board a Nazi submarine with her fellow protagonist, Rock. She's looting the Nazi corpses of their valuables when Rock chimes in with his opinion on the matter.
These medals are proof of what these people did. We don't have the right to take that away from them.
Revy doesn't take too kindly to this. She feels that Rock is calling her actions immoral, and when she says,
Nothing's worse than being treated like some whore by your companions. I'll say this once. The next time you decide you're gonna tell me what's proper, you'll no longer be one of us. When that happens, I'm gonna kill you.
it's because she's done a hell of a lot worse than loot corpses in her life. In her mind, if Rock objects to this, Rock objects to her and everything she's done in the name of her survival. At this point, she does not feel like she can trust him to be a member of her crew, as they all ultimately rely on each other to continue their business. But Rock gets an opportunity to get his say on the matter.
In that case, I'll say it again. I didn't make any mistake. I've nothing to apologize for. That's what I'm saying.
After he saves a sour business transaction that Revy would not have been able to successfully handle on her own, he gains a streak of confidence that enables him to speak his mind. Revy decides this crosses a line and shoots him. But he just grabs the gun and it grazes his temple. That definitely would have knocked him out and probably shatters some skull into his brain, but it's a cartoon, so I'll let it slide. What Rock says here completely turns Revy's perception of him on its head.
I thought I was done with kissing ass for a living, but here I am at the ends of the earth, and now I'm supposed to be kissing your ass? What kind of sick joke is this?
You fucking spoiled, arrogant son of a...
It's Rock! And arrogant? Who the hell are you kidding? Why don't you try taking a good look at yourself? Aren't you supposed to be some kind of outlaw, a wild pirate? But as soon as you open your mouth, all I ever hear you talking about is money, money, money. You think you'd be some hard-ass villain after the big prize, but you end up scavenging off corpses instead. Is there any fucking limit to how greedy you can be? Are you really that pathetic? Don't you have any pride left in you?
Not just because he shows some balls, but also because he shows that he does have respect for her. He doesn't object to Revy's belief in power, he objects to the complete lack of direction that she takes that power, the lack of values or aspirations she uses her power for. Of course, this doesn't necessarily change Revy's nihilistic outlook, but it does regain her trust that Rock isn't a liability and has the respect for her that's required for her trust in a life or death partnership. And she gives that respect back. And also kind of gets the hots for him. I can't really blame her. My favorite part of the scene, though, was what it revealed about Revy that I found a little bit too much of myself in.
You really think you can judge me, Mr. White Collar? What do you know about my life, huh? What the hell do you know about me? Go on, why don't you tell me? A guy like you who spent his life in a safe little bubble has no idea what I've been through.
Revy lived a tough life, and she feels like anyone who hasn't lived through similar experiences just can't ever understand her. She puts a wall between herself and people she assumes will never even attempt to understand her. What's so satisfying about this scene is how Rock tears down that wall and manages to make a real connection with her. If only it worked like that on mass public media, we'd all get along better, wouldn't we? This is the part where I talk about social justice. Now, if you haven't figured out already, I'm a trans woman. I definitely have a horse in the social justice race. And what I see in myself and Revy in this scene, I also see in a lot of my fellow transes. A wall built as a defense mechanism from the injustice of the world that, while useful to protect ourselves against aggressors, also often walls ourselves off from allies as well. Now, I don't like to make overreaching conclusions about the state of society based on what happens on the internet. What happens on the internet and what happens in real life are so insanely dissonant that they might as well be two different realities. But unfortunately, interactions that happen on the internet do often affect the real world, and rarely does that happen the other way around. So I'm going to talk about Twitter. Now, I gotta be upfront, I've been clean from Twitter since November last year, so maybe something has changed, although I doubt it. I saw the writing on the wall and what that website was gonna get used for, and decided it had no possible benefit for me any longer. Not that I ever really did. A pretty recurring theme I found on my timeline was minority infighting. People of color dismissing white trans people's points about transphobia because they didn't experience racism, trans people dismissing allies because they didn't experience transphobia, and absolutely none of it was productive. Nothing good came of these conversations. When I started my first and only semester of university, one of my classes was an anthropology class about race, and one of the topics was white privilege. The things that white people generally had an easier time dealing with in society than people of color did. And while I was perusing this list of injustices that many people of color experienced, I found that about half of them applied to me as a trans woman living in a red state. For me, it was an eye-opening experience that I could actually connect with other minorities because we've ultimately all experienced similar injustices. And I've made so many strong real-life relationships from this mutual understanding. Well, that's not how it works on the internet, is it? Some people call this phenomenon the oppression Olympics, but buzzwords and phrases like this tend to just pre-program people into automatic responses, and it's very dismissive of the reasons these things actually happen. So I'm going to reword it. A lot of people are very tired of their struggles being misunderstood by others, so they lose patience even with people who are genuinely capable of understanding them. I can't give you empirical evidence of this, but I can just tell you it was true for me, so it's probably true for more than just myself. But the solution isn't to wall yourself off from everyone, it's to reach out. And something that often gets misunderstood is that that's just not always easy. But I can tell you how I did it. If Misato was literally me, Revi was who I wanted to be. She awakened something in me, part of me I had repressed for a long time. If Misato helped me understand how to value myself regardless of my flaws, Revi helped me understand how to be unapologetically myself around other people. Now this seems like a good time to mention that, much like Revi, I am not a good role model. I am not the result of a healthy development in childhood and early adulthood. I am the result of unrestricted access to the internet at a young age, and coming out as trans around neo-Nazis. It was over for me a long time ago. I'm a lost cause. Revi is probably the healthiest role model I can get out of a TV show. If you're normal, she's not a good role model. But before I found these characters, I found something I experienced on the internet was replacing my individual identity for a collective identity. I became less of myself and more of the others I met online that shared my outlook on politics, philosophy, and life. And something that happened in this process was, for lack of a better term, purity testing your friends. This doesn't happen because you aren't capable of being friends with someone who thinks differently than you, but because you can't share a collective identity with someone who's fundamentally different from you. And what happens when you take this all the way to its ultimate conclusion? You're left with yourself, the individual. Except because you've replaced your identity with a collective identity, and you've replaced your friends with a collective consciousness, you're now alone with no identity. Now I hear you asking, ma'am, this is a Wendy's. Also, what the fuck does this have to do with your Literally Me anime characters? Well, first of all, I'd like a 10-piece spicy nugget and a cheesy fry. Second of all, after being on Twitter for so long, but before I finally broke the spell and touched grass, I found myself devoid of an identity. Of course, I need to say, this is ultimately just a projection of my own experience. But if I've experienced it, I'm sure someone else has, and I'd like to help that person if I can. So this is how I found my identity again. When I'm watching any show that has characters that are well written and interesting to me, I look for characters that have pretty similar surface level traits to me, especially the negative ones that end up hurting them. After you identify these characters, the next thing I do is watch the show, watch them develop, and pay special attention to their backstory, the traumas that lead to the coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms they display. And if you do all this and you think, oh my fucking god, they're just like me for real, you've found a starting point for introspection. Now I think it needs to be said that all characters are written by people, and so they all have biases. But most of the time, any frame of reference to understand yourself is better than none. You may find yourself disagreeing with the author's perspective on struggles that the character experiences and that you've also experienced. And that's okay. That's part of being human. There is no objective way to frame human identity. By taking a character and making it your own, you can start to understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, you can develop confidence in who you are and what you believe. And if you do that, I think you'll find a lot more strength to face the outside world, knowing that people who lash out from their own pain are just as flawed and beautiful as you are. I use the term queer identity in this title because what I've found from talking to a lot of queer people is that the common thread between all of us is that we all have the emotional maturity to untether our individual identity from a prescribed societal identity. It's kind of a prerequisite to question your sexual or gender identity in the first place. So if you're watching this and any of this resonates with you, congratulations, you're a idiot. Get indoctrinated, idiot. That's not the whole story, though. See, there's a different perspective on how the self should be conceptualized, and I know it far too well to ignore it. I've spent a lot of my youth on the internet around fascists of all different flavors. Christian fascists, Muslim fascists, neo-Nazis, anarcho-primitivists were probably the most purest form of fascism, if one can distill fascism, but I've met all sorts of fascists. This fascism was just in the air of this community. It was everywhere, baked into the digital reality. I want to be careful making sweeping claims about the definition of fascism, but what I can say for absolute certainty is that every single fascist I've ever met feels the need to be better than someone else. They need to be on a hierarchy somewhere. They don't necessarily need to be at the top. They just need someone to look down on. What's really interesting is that the kind of ritualistic cancel culture we normally associate with the left was also extremely common in this community. And it was so much more brutal. While leftists also see the need to feel superior to others, this usually comes in the form of moral superiority. And so the language, while it's not totally subdued, is also grounded in this idea that there is some moral virtuousness to strive for. And while they often strive for it in questionable ways, there is a significant difference in what leftist cancel culture looks like and what fascist cancel culture looks like. While leftist cancel culture typically has some kind of moral benchmark that an increasingly small number of people are striving for, fascist cancel culture is just stabbing you to death because you made them feel insecure about their sexuality. It's doxing someone for no other reason that they came out as trans and are trying to find their own happiness in ways that diverge from others. And also threatening to hunt them down for sport. That was a fun one. They feel threatened by this divergence because either consciously or subconsciously, it forces them to confront whether or not the path they're walking is actually the best one for them. I've seen this play out so many times. After I came out, many of these macho fascist characters privately messaged me about how me coming out has made them question their own gender and sexuality. And after talking to these people, they either became more loving and caring people, or they became the most vitriolic and hateful people you can imagine. To put it in internet terms, and I hate that this is such an accurate distillation of fascism and anti-fascism, but it really is, the whole cringe versus killing the part of you that cringes is a pretty pure distillation of fascism and anti-fascism. And something you need to understand about these people is that once they chose this path of vitriol and hatred, the only language they know is power. And the truth is, if you're on that side, you can't afford to not speak that language.
Now it's my turn to talk. Here's some advice. If you can hit your target, pretty much any gun will do the trick. Now that's one to grow on. Say hi to the Fuhrer for me, would ya?
One more thing. My favorite line from Revy is this one.
If you cling to life, you live in fear of death, and that fear will cloud your judgment. But once you've managed to free yourself of that, you can go on fighting to the end of the world.
The reason I'm making this video is because it's what I always wanted to share with the world, but I've always felt a bit too self-conscious to post it on the internet. It's hard for me to kill the part that cringes. It's pretty deep in my psyche. But with how my country is pretty soon going to make trans people a political enemy and conjure up any excuse to label us as enemies and put us in camps, time is running out on that. As a person, I am equal in worth to any other. There are those that believe otherwise and want to exercise their power over me, to feed their own belief in superiority. If that's you, I'm here to remind you. You're made of the same flesh and blood as I am. And I am not fucking going to El Salvador.